The marble floors of First National Bank gleamed under fluorescent lights as Margaret Chen shuffled through the revolving door, her worn canvas shoes squeaking softly against the polished surface. At 73, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that haste led to falls, and falls led to hospital bills she couldn't afford. Her threadbare coat, patched at the elbows with mismatched fabric, hung loosely on her thin frame. In her gnarled hands, she clutched a small envelope containing her Social Security check, the lifeline that would carry her through another month. The bank bustled with the usual Friday afternoon crowd. Behind her, a man's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Excuse me. Some of us actually have important business to conduct." Margaret turned to see a tall man in his early 50s, impeccably dressed in what was clearly a tailored Italian suit. His Rolex caught the light as he gestured impatiently, and his leather briefcase probably cost more than Margaret's rent. His face bore the particular kind of irritation that comes from someone unaccustomed to waiting. "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly, stepping aside even though she had been waiting her turn. "I didn't mean to—" Yeah, the man interrupted, brushing past her toward the teller window. "Time is money, lady. Maybe you've got all day, but some of us are running companies." Margaret felt her cheeks flush, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that arguing with people like him was like shouting at the rain. Instead, she took her place at the back of the line again, behind a young mother juggling a toddler and an infant, and waited. The man, whose name was Richard Westbrook III, though he preferred people call him Rick when he wanted to seem approachable, drummed, his manicured fingers on the counter as the teller processed his transaction. He owned 3 luxury car dealerships across the state and had just closed a deal that would net him another $2 million. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications from his stock portfolio, each alert a reminder of his financial prowess. "Mr. Westbrook, your account balance is now at $8,147,592.18, the teller said with professional courtesy. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Rick smirked. "Just move some of that into my offshore account." "You know the one." He spoke loudly enough that the people nearby could hear, a peacock displaying his plumage. He glanced back at the line, his eyes sweeping dismissively over the ordinary people waiting for their turn to deposit modest paychecks or withdraw grocery money. His gaze landed on Margaret, still waiting patiently at the back. Something about her shabby appearance amused him. Here he was with millions in the bank, and there she stood, probably checking if her measly pension had cleared. The contrast struck him as almost comical. 20 minutes later, when Margaret finally reached a teller window, Rick was still in the lobby, on his phone arguing with his contractor about the imported marble for his new pool house. He couldn't help but overhear her quiet, apologetic voice. "I just want to see my balance, please," Margaret said, sliding her worn bank card across the counter. "I need to make sure my check deposited." Rick let out a short, derisive laugh into his phone. "Hold on, Jerry," he said to his contractor. He lowered his phone, unable to resist the opportunity for what he considered harmless sport. "Let me guess. Sweetheart, you're checking to see if you can afford the early bird special at Denny's?" The other customers shifted uncomfortably. The young mother from earlier gave Rick a disgusted look, but he didn't notice or didn't care. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she waited, but she didn't respond to his mockery. She had weathered far worse storms than a cruel stranger. The teller, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, who had been working at this branch for 15 years, slid the card through the reader. Her expression was neutral, professional, but her fingers moved with the particular gentleness reserved for customers she genuinely cared about. The screen loaded. Patricia's eyes widened. She blinked, looked again, then glanced up at Margaret with barely concealed surprise. "Mrs. Chen, your balance is something wrong?" Margaret asked, concern creeping into her voice. "Did my check not clear?" Rick, still listening, chuckled. "What's the matter? Overdraft fees eating into your fortune?" Patricia ignored him entirely. She turned the monitor slightly so Margaret could see the screen. "Mrs. Chen, your account balance is 47,289,432.67. The lobby fell silent. Rick's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the marble floor. What did you just say? Margaret looked at the screen, confusion crossing her weathered face. That can't be right. There must be some mistake. I should have about 1,347 down from my check and what was left from last month. Patricia was already typing, pulling up the transaction history. No, ma'am. There's no mistake. The funds have been accumulating for, it looks like, nearly 50 years. Regular deposits, compound interest, dividend reinvestments. Her voice trailed off as she scrolled through decades of financial history. Rick had gone pale. He picked up his phone from the floor and moved closer, his earlier arrogance evaporating into stunned disbelief. That's impossible, he muttered. Nobody who dresses like... He couldn't finish the sentence. Margaret stared at the screen as if it were written in a foreign language. I don't understand. I've never had that kind of money. I've been living on Social Security and my late husband's pension. Patricia continued reading through the account notes, her expression softening with each line. Mrs. Chen, according to these records, your husband opened this account in 1973. There's a note here from him. Would you like me to read it? Margaret nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. For my Margaret, Patricia read softly. I'm not good with words, so I'll let my actions speak. Every week I'm putting aside what I can from my wages at the factory. Not much, just $20 here, $50 when we have a good month. I'm investing it like that nice young broker suggested, in something called an index fund. By the time you need it, this should be enough to take care of you. You've sacrificed so much for our children, for me, for everyone around you. You never spend a dime on yourself. When I'm gone, promise me you'll finally live the life you deserve. All my love, Henry. The lobby had become a tableau of frozen strangers, all pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. Henry, she whispered. Oh, Henry, you foolish, wonderful man. Rick stood there, his expensive shoes rooted to the cheap linoleum, watching this elderly woman in her patched coat absorb the reality that she was wealthier than he was. The irony wasn't lost on him, and for the first time in years he felt genuinely small. Mrs. Chen, Patricia said gently, there's more. After your husband passed, the account shows that you've been making withdrawals for, let me see, donations to children's hospitals, anonymous payments of medical bills for families in your neighborhood, funding scholarships for immigrant students, paying off lunch debt at local schools. Those were emergencies, Margaret said quickly. Just small amounts to help people who needed it more than I did. Small amounts? Patricia smiled. Mrs. Chen, you've given away over $3 million in the past 20 years. Rick felt something crack inside his chest. This woman, who could have lived in luxury, had been living in poverty by choice, not because she was foolish, but because she saw people in need and couldn't help but give. While he had spent his millions on sports cars and vacation homes, she had been quietly changing lives. I'm sorry, Rick said suddenly, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Everyone turned to look at him. Mrs. Chen, I'm deeply sorry. For what I said. For how I treated you. For who I am, apparently. Margaret looked at him with eyes that held no anger, only a deep, weary kindness. You didn't know, she said simply. That's the problem, Rick replied, his voice rough with emotion. I should have treated you with respect regardless of what I knew or didn't know about your bank account. That's what you would have done. That's what you did, even when I was cruel to you. He stood there, this millionaire who had thought himself so important, humbled by a woman who had more money than him but wore patched coats because she'd rather feed hungry children than buy new clothes. Margaret turned back to Patricia. I need to make sure the scholarship fund gets topped up this month. There are 5 students waiting to hear if they can afford college next year. Of course, Mrs. Chen, Patricia said, making notes. The same amount as usual? Double it, Margaret said firmly. Henry would want that, and check if the children's hospital still needs that new wing. I think we can help with that now. Rick watched her, this lesson in humility playing out before his eyes. He thought of his 3 ex-wives, his estranged children, The employees he'd fired for minor infractions, the charitable donations he'd refused because they weren't tax-deductible enough. He had spent 51 years building an empire of money and somehow had forgotten to build a life worth living. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "I know I have no right to ask this, but would you let me buy you a cup of coffee? I think I need to learn something from you." Margaret studied him for a long moment, seeing not the arrogant man who had mocked her, but the wounded soul underneath. The little boy who had learned to measure his worth in dollars and had forgotten all other currencies of human value. "I'd like that," she said. "But you're buying cookies too. The good ones, not those cheap grocery store things. If you're going to learn from me, first lesson is this: never skimp on cookies." For the first time in what felt like decades, Rick Westbrook laughed, not the practiced, calculating chuckle of a deal-maker, but a genuine surprised burst of joy. As they left the bank together, an unlikely pair under the afternoon sun, Patricia watched them go and smiled. She had seen a lot in 15 years behind that counter, but she had never seen someone's life change quite so visibly, quite so completely as Rick Westbrook's had in the span of 20 minutes. The young mother with the toddler approached the counter next, and as Patricia helped her deposit her paycheck, she found herself thinking about Margaret Chen's patched coat and full heart, about Rick Westbrook's expensive suit and empty life, and about how the truest measure of wealth had nothing to do with the numbers on a screen. Outside, Margaret and Rick walked slowly toward the coffee shop on the corner, and he found himself matching her careful pace, no longer in such a hurry to get anywhere. For the first time in his life, he understood that some destinations were worth taking your time to reach.